Part of what drives me crazy and insane about religious theist is the same today as non-stamped collectors video in the Great Debate has pointed out on this particular corner of the internet before, but apparently because it didn't reach people like, oh, I don't know, the Atlantic is writing about Boler and Balnaser's book about, how, supposedly science and that cutting edge empirical proof observable in the natural world makes a firm case for God. With this, they strive for the ultimate alchemy, transforming faith into fact. See, they're ultimately relying on the fine tuning argument about all this, and the problem and the chief objection with the fine-tuning argument is that none of the observable so I can concede, for instance, that the universe is, appears finely tuned for life and everything, and that, we got it on this particular planet, and if you altered any of the variables, then, things would, you know, very easily, by even very slight degrees would, be thrown into chaos. Now I can concede that argument, and I still have a, a rebuttal to all of it, which is to say that a universe that is finely tuned for life does nothing to favor Yahweh over Brahman, or Brahman over the spaghetti the invisible spaghetti monster, or the invisible spaghetti monster over Big Cat in the sky. The fact of the matter is that if our universe it appears finely tuned for life, it could be any of the particular intelligent designers that humanity has dreamed up over thousands of years, or it might be none of them. It may be something that is so fundamentally alien to our understanding that we haven't even dreamed it up yet. And everything, and so there's nothing there's nothing that, suggests that it wasn't nothing about the fine-tuning argument suggests that the designer wasn't an unknown unknown. We don't know, and we don't know that we don't know it, and everything. I mean, for all we know, if all these variables are set in motion, it could have been aliens that did it and everything. And in a lot of respects, a flawed, imperfect designer makes far more sense and fits with life on this planet more than, the Christian God does. Because, I mean, I'll link to this in the underbar, but would a loving designer design the human botfly, for instance? And the horrible experience that this woman has seems to be a pretty direct refutation to the idea that this was all designed by a loving designer, and it really screws with my religious faith to see things like this, and everything, because, I'm thinking to myself, would a loving designer make this kind of insect in the first place? And the answer I get is a pretty resounding no. And yet it does exist. And so, how, if this is the case, does, a loving designer fit with what we know about the world we live in? Every day, unfortunately, one of the tragic things that happens in our world is that children are born with cancers, and everything, the horrible things that you might see in a children's hospital, and just the absolute injustice of all of it that you see going on. I mean, these people were infected with something before they were even able to sin in any way. So, this idea that this is God punishing humanity for sin doesn't really square with the reality of what we're seeing. I mean, these people were sick before they even had a chance to sin. So, this I guess a lot of what I wanted to drive at is that our world doesn't really fit, you know, it doesn't really fit well and squarely with the idea that if there is a God up there in the sky, that God is loving, like I think that this only really is a fantasy that's able to be persisted by Christians because in Western society we've done such a good job of beating back the horrors of nature, and that, it takes traveling somewhere, pretty remote. Well, not remote, but somewhere like Belize, to encounter something like this, these monsters inside me with a human botfly. and everything. I mean, it's just a a thing, and the end of this video. Anyways, so that's what drives me crazy about these guys. I mean, they want to say, and everything. They want to come out here and say that us atheists and everything are, Turek wants to have this whole argument about how he's doesn't have enough faith to be an atheist and everything, as though, it's an unreasonable position to be an atheist and everything. And meanwhile, we've got the obvious objection to all of this, which is that, it is a huge massive logical leap to go from, the universe appears finely tuned to life to whoever tuned it is Yahweh. That just doesn't follow, you know, and everything. It doesn't follow directly from, the universe appears finely tuned for life. Even if it was, you have no reason to believe that it wasn't Big Cat in the sky as opposed to Yahweh. There's nothing, and this is the problem. Science cannot help you, in such a big way. As atheists, if we simply sit there, in the corner for long enough without saying anything, you guys will start killing each other. Because, I mean, look at this. Look at this does nothing to, resolve the tensions between theistic camps. I mean, a universe finely tuned for life is one that Muslims are just as readily saying makes a case for Allah, and if you haven't seen them doing this, if you haven't seen them engaging this behavior, you haven't looked hard enough for it. Because they are. They objectively are, as the Hindus are, as well, saying that it makes the case for Brahman or Shiva, because there are multiple paths within Hinduism. They're all saying, essentially the same thing, and using this scientific evidence to say that, it suggests that their version of the truth is the truth. But the problem with that is, like I said, I mean, there's nothing about a universe finely tuned for life that suggests that it was Yahweh, as opposed to Allah, as opposed to Brahman, as opposed to Zeus, as opposed to Kronos and Titan and all the Greek gods, and as opposed to Neptune and like and as opposed to Big Cat in the Sky, as well as opposed to the flying spaghetti monster. None of it, you know nothing about the fine tuning argument is finely tuned for believers in any particular religion to use that particular line of evidence to suggest, their version of the truth is the truth, their deity. And so, like, this is such a big problem, and it's just been overlooked by them and everything. Uh, None of the empirical proof within science favors any particular deity over any other. If an intelligent designer for all this is responsible for all this, then aliens are just as good of an answer as Yahweh is. And in fact, something not infallible suggests explain things better, as children are born with cancer and HIV spreads by blood, and I don't believe any of this is something that a loving designer would design in the first place. Our world fits better with the deity that is flawed and makes mistakes, and fucks up from time to time, and unfortunately has some of their terrible creations unleashed on the planet.